She had $73, a busted lip, and one shot at disappearing before he realized she was gone. 28 years old, no family, no record of anyone in this city who would notice if she vanished, or notice if she stopped vanishing and started showing up in a morgue photograph instead. The storm outside wasn't a backdrop, it was a warning, and Nyla Mercer, who had spent 5 years learning to read the weather inside a man's eyes before it became thunder in his fists, understood warnings better than most people understood their own names. She ran anyway. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let me watch how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens on that subway train tonight will change everything. The rain came sideways across Meridian City the night Nyla Mercer finally broke. Not broke the way people use that word loosely. Not broke like she was sad. Not broke like she needed a drink and a conversation with a sympathetic friend. Broke the way a bone breaks after being stressed too many times in the same place. Clean through. The kind of break that either kills you or forces the body to rebuild something harder in the gap. She had been planning it for 11 days. Not the grand kind of planning that people imagine when they think about escape. No notebooks, no money saved in a secret account, no friend waiting with a spare bedroom key. She had none of those things. Travis had made sure of that. He had a talent for it. The kind of patient, methodical destruction that never leaves the sort of marks investigators photograph. He had isolated her so thoroughly over 5 years that the architecture of her world had quietly narrowed until its walls were him. Its ceiling was him. Its floor was the version of herself she could only be when he wasn't watching. The planning was simpler and more desperate than anyone would believe. She had watched the subway schedule on a public library terminal 3 Tuesdays in a row, always during the window when Travis believed she was buying groceries on Farrell Street. She had memorized the 11:47 northbound departure from the Caldwell Avenue station. She had noted that the platform was nearly empty at that hour on weeknights, that the single security camera above the turnstile pointed at a fixed angle that left the far staircase dark. She had worn the crimson sweater because it was the warmest thing she owned that wasn't a gift from him. Everything he gave her she had come to understand as inventory, property he had lent to the version of herself he constructed. And because the color was dark enough to absorb what her split lip was still producing despite the paper towel she'd pressed against it for most of the walk. $73. She'd taken it from the emergency envelope he kept rubber-banded inside the cereal box on the second shelf, the envelope he never touched because Travis Kane did not eat cereal and she was the one who bought it. She left $3 in the envelope. She didn't know why. Some residual instinct toward not taking everything, toward leaving something behind so the person she was escaping from would not feel entirely robbed. That was the kind of thinking he'd installed in her. She recognized it and hated it, and took the $73 anyway. The rain hit her the moment she stepped outside the building, and she didn't have an umbrella and she didn't go back for one. She walked the 11 blocks to Caldwell Avenue in a rain that turned the streets into black mirrors, the city lights bleeding in long smears across every puddle, and she kept her face down and her shoulders compressed, and she walked the way she had learned to walk in 5 years of marriage to Travis Kane. Small, quiet, apologetic for the space she occupied, careful not to make eye contact with anyone who might remember her face later. She walked like a woman who had been taught that visibility was dangerous. By the time she reached the station entrance, her hair was soaked flat against her skull, and the crimson sweater had darkened to the color of old blood, and her hands were shaking. The shaking wasn't cold. She knew the difference. The turnstile accepted her token. The staircase swallowed her into the yellow underground light. The platform was nearly empty, the way she'd planned. An elderly man in a canvas jacket sat at the far end reading a folded newspaper, not looking up. A teenager with enormous headphones stood near the pillar closest to the stairs, moving slightly to music nobody else could hear. The fluorescent light above the second bench was dying, stuttering in 3-second intervals that made the shadows pulse. Nyla stood at the edge of the platform and watched the dark tunnel mouth and listened to the distant sound of the train still approaching, still underground, still a minute or more away. She breathed, in through her nose, counting to 4, out through her mouth, counting to 4. The technique was from a pamphlet she'd found once in the break room of the dry cleaners where she'd worked briefly the second year of the marriage, before Travis decided her being around other people was an inconvenience to him. She'd memorized the pamphlet and returned it to the rack and never mentioned it to anyone.
It was hers, one of the very few things that was.
The train arrived with a sound like pressure releasing. She boarded the third car from the front, the way the schedule in her head told her to. Less foot traffic, closer to the rear exit at the northbound terminal. The car was almost empty. Two women talking quietly near the front. A man in a delivery uniform asleep across two seats with his cap over his face. A college-aged girl highlighting a textbook with the mechanical focus of someone who has found peace in the repetition of useful tasks. Nyla took a seat near the middle, facing the window. The glass gave her back a distorted reflection. The wet hair, the crimson sweater, the shadow of the bruising along her jaw that makeup had softened but not erased. She looked at the reflection the way you look at a photograph of someone you used to know. Recognition without connection. The face in the glass belonged to a woman who had spent 5 years becoming smaller and quieter and more invisible. And Nyla was trying to decide tonight whether that woman was someone to mourn or someone to leave on the platform. She was still deciding when he sat down beside her. She felt the weight shift in the seat before she saw him, and her body reacted before her mind caught up. A full-body flinch, shoulders rising, hands tightening on the strap of her handbag, the silent animal calculation of how far away the nearest door was. That calculation had become involuntary. She ran it in restaurants, in elevators, in the grocery store aisles, in every enclosed space she inhabited. Travis had given her that gift too. But when she turned, it wasn't Travis. The man who had sat beside her was Korean, somewhere in his early 30s, with the kind of composed stillness that doesn't come from calm, so much as from a life in which composure has become a professional requirement. He was dressed in a navy suit that had no business looking that unaffected by the rain. Either he had walked from somewhere very close, or he had the kind of presence that repelled disorder. His black hair was pushed back from his forehead with the minimal effort of someone who doesn't think much about how he looks because he has never needed to. On the back of his right hand, emerging from beneath the cuff of his jacket, the head of a dragon tattoo was visible. Detailed, deliberate. The ink so dark it looked engraved rather than drawn.
He was looking at the window too. Not at her. At the window. Neela exhaled, released some of the tension in her shoulders. Not all of it. Never all of it. But some. She turned back to her own reflection. 30 seconds of silence. The train rocked through a curve. The lights in the car flickered once. Your lip is still bleeding. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that doesn't rise in pitch to confirm that it's asking a question. He said it the way someone states a fact they believe you are already aware of, but perhaps have not addressed. Nyla didn't look at him. I'm fine. I didn't say you weren't. She said nothing. She pressed the sleeve of her sweater against the corner of her lip, the motion practiced, automatic. You've been doing that since you sat down, he said. Now she looked at him. She had learned to read faces quickly, another gift from 5 years of necessary vigilance. And what she found in his was neither predatory nor pitying. He was simply looking at her the way someone looks at a situation they are trying to understand fully before deciding how to engage with it. She didn't know what to do with that. It's not your business, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. He looked back at the window. Nyla's jaw tightened. She wasn't sure what she'd expected. An argument, an apology, an explanation. But the simple agreement landed strangely. In her experience, men who pushed into spaces they hadn't been invited into did not tend to agree that they shouldn't be there. They justified. They redirected. They found a way to make their intrusion your gratitude. He sat with the easy silence of someone who does not feel the need to fill space. She watched him in the peripheral edge of her vision, the way she had learned to watch without appearing to watch. The dragon tattoo extended further than the hand. She could see the scales disappearing up the wrist toward the sleeve. The suit was not just expensive. It was the kind of expensive that comes with the understanding that the person wearing it will never have to explain what they do for a living to anyone who matters. There was a small scar along the line of his jaw, faint but distinct, the kind that only comes one way. He wasn't safe. She knew that. She had a talent for knowing that. But he wasn't Travis. And tonight, the distinction felt enormous. The train was slowing. Aldgate Station, the next stop before she needed to transfer. Nyla glanced up at the route map above the doors, confirming. She had 17 more minutes if she stayed on this line to Northgate Terminal,
where she had a vague, half-formed plan to find the women's shelter on Crescent Avenue that she had looked up once on the library terminal and memorized the address of the way you memorize an exit on a burning building. Automatically, desperately, without the full confidence that you'll ever actually use it. The train slowed further. Through the window, she could see the platform at Aldgate emerging from the darkness, the yellowed concrete, the advertisement posters rain-warped at their edges, the cluster of commuters waiting on the platform under the inadequate shelter of the overhang. Then she saw Travis. He was standing at the center of the platform in a gray jacket she recognized, the one he wore when he wasn't expecting to need to look presentable, when he was in problem-solving mode rather than performance mode. His hands were loose at his sides. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't frantic. He was scanning the train windows with the systematic patience of a man who has done this before and knows that patience pays out. He hadn't seen her yet. The train was still slowing. Nyla's entire body went rigid. The $73, the 11 days of planning, the 11 blocks in the rain, the turnstile and the staircase and the dying fluorescent light and the $3 she'd left in the envelope for a reason she still couldn't name. All of it compressed into the single terrible fact visible through the rain-streaked glass. He was here. He had found her. Again. Her hands were shaking around the strap of the handbag. Her breathing had abandoned the counted rhythm from the pamphlet. Her mind was running the calculations. Door, platform, run, which direction. But the calculations kept collapsing because Travis had a longer stride than her and had always been able to find her, and she didn't have anywhere to go that he didn't already know about, because he had made absolutely certain of that over 5 years of quiet, patient, architectural demolition. She was half standing before she understood what she was doing. "Sit down," the voice beside her, low, not a suggestion. She looked at the man in the navy suit. He was watching the platform now, watching Travis specifically, not with the expression of someone recognizing a stranger, but with the focused clinical attention of someone cataloging a problem. His jaw was set. Something in the quality of the air around him had shifted, the way the pressure shifts before a storm. "He's my—" she started. "I know what he is," Jae-hyun said. He knew. She could see it. Whatever he had seen in her face and her lip and her shaking hands and her practiced flinch over the past several minutes had assembled itself in his mind into a picture he recognized. "Sit down," he said again, quietly, "and don't look at him." The train stopped, the doors opened, Nyla sat. She stared at her own hands in her lap, the knuckles white against the dark strap of the bag, and in her peripheral vision she could see Travis stepping toward the nearest open door 3 cars forward, beginning to board, beginning to move through the train systematically in the direction of her car. She knew how long this car was. She knew how quickly he walked. She counted seconds. Beside her, Kang Jae-hyun stood. He stepped toward those open doors of their car, and he stepped out onto the platform. And the quality of his posture changed the moment his feet hit the concrete. Not dramatically, not with any visible effort, but something in the way he held himself shifted from a man in a train car to something else entirely, something that occupied space differently, that sent a message through its stillness alone. Nyla watched through the window, her breath held. Travis had stopped. He was 3 cars down, half aboard, 1 foot still on the platform. And he had stopped because the man in the navy suit was walking toward him with the specific, unhurried certainty of someone who has already decided how this ends. She couldn't hear what was said. She could see Travis's face. She had spent 5 years reading that face, mapping its weather patterns, interpreting its micro-expressions the way sailors read clouds. She saw the moment the confidence cracked. She saw it go from the blank-focused expression he wore when he was hunting to something else. Something that happened in his eyes first, a recalibration, a rapid internal assessment of threat that reached a conclusion he hadn't expected. She saw him step back off the train. Jae-hyun said something else. Travis stepped back again, then turned, then walked toward the far exit staircase without looking back. Nyla released the breath she had been holding so long, her vision had started to blur at the edges. The doors closed. The train moved. Jae-hyun returned to the seat beside her, adjusted the cuff of his jacket over the dragon tattoo, and looked at the window again. "Who are you?" Nyla said. "Someone who was on the same train as you." "That's not an answer. It's the answer you need right now." She stared at him. Her heart was still hammering. She could feel it in her throat, in the places her injuries ached, in the pressure behind her eyes. What did you say to him? I told him his name. She waited. And his employer, Jae-hyun continued, without inflection. And the name of the man his employer answers to. And that if he came within 300 meters of this train again tonight, those men would know about his recent decision to sell a contact list to the Varo Syndicate. Nyla stared at him. He's been busy, Jae-hyun said. Your husband. He's not my husband anymore. The words came out faster and harder than she intended, carrying 5 years of rejection in them. He stopped being that the first time he used his hands. Jae-hyun nodded once. No argument, no qualification, just acknowledgement. How do you know about the Varo Syndicate? She asked. Because they operate in my city. He said it with the flat certainty of someone describing a property they own. Not bragging, stating. Nyla looked at the dragon tattoo, just visible beneath the cuff. And Travis? He's been selling to them. For roughly 6 weeks. A pause. He's been using your name to open doors, telling them you have access to information you don't have. It's a desperate move. It tends not to end well for the person making it. He told them about me? He told them you could be leverage. Jae-hyun's voice didn't change. He was wrong about what kind. The train car rocked through the dark tunnel. The college girl with the highlighter had fallen asleep over her textbook. The delivery man hadn't moved. The 2 women near the front had disembarked at Aldgate. I don't understand why you helped me, Nyla said. You were bleeding on my train, and your face had the look of someone about to make a decision they wouldn't survive. Your train. My city, he said. Same thing. She should have been more frightened by that. She recognized that on some intellectual level, the casual declaration of territorial ownership, the knowledge he'd demonstrated about criminal enterprises, the composed lethality of the way he'd walked toward Travis on that platform. She should have been terrified. She was, a little. But she had spent 5 years terrified of a man who raised his voice and his hands in the apartment on Creston Street, and what she had just watched was something different in kind. What she had just watched was a man walk toward a threat without anger, without the need to prove anything, without the small, ugly pettiness that Travis carried like a second skin. It had been almost impersonal, clinical, the removal of a problem. Where are you going? He asked. Northgate. There's a shelter on Crescent Avenue. I know it. He was quiet for a moment. It's been closed for 2 months, funding issue. Nyla closed her eyes. Of course it had. Of course the one fixed point in her half-formed plan had shifted while she wasn't watching. Then I'll figure something else out, she said. Because there was nothing else to say. Because she had been figuring something else out her entire life, had been adapting to the gap between what she'd been told the world would offer and what it actually produced, had been running those calculations since the group home in East Meridian where she'd spent 3 years at 14 through 17, assembling survival strategies the way other girls assembled weekend plans. How much money do you have? She looked at him sideways. Enough. $73 doesn't cover a week anywhere in this city. She felt a cold shock move through her. How? I noticed what you took from the envelope in your bag when you boarded, he said, without apology, without embarrassment. It's habit. I notice things. She stared at him. I'm not going to take it, he said, reading her expression with the same clinical ease he seemed to apply to everything. I have more money than I can spend in 6 lifetimes. $73 is not something I need. Then why mention it? Because you should know that I know the exact shape of the situation you're in. His eyes met hers, fully, for the first time. They were dark and steady and contained something she couldn't easily name. Not warmth, not coldness, but a kind of complete attention that she wasn't accustomed to receiving. No shelter, no contact, no money that lasts. A man who just learned you ran and who will not stop looking. And a city that is considerably more complicated tonight than you realized before you boarded this train. Nyla said nothing. The Varo Syndicate will not stop looking for you either, he continued. Travis gave them your name and implied access. They don't let go of access. I'm nobody, she said. I'm literally nobody. I have nothing they want. You have proximity to me now, Jae-hyun said, whether you want it or not, whether either of us intended it or not. The moment Travis saw me on that platform, proximity was established. Varro will hear about it before morning.
The train was slowing again. Not Northgate. One stop before. Nyla looked at the window, at the reflection of herself in the dark glass, at the woman who had walked 11 blocks in the rain and made it this far and had just discovered that the exit was closed, and the man she'd been running from had apparently been doing something catastrophically stupid for 6 weeks that had dragged her into the orbit of something she didn't yet understand. "So what happens now?" she said. Jae-hyun stood as the train reached the platform. "Now," he said, looking down at her with the kind of calm that comes from having made decisions in significantly worse situations, "you come with me, or you walk out of that door and into a city where 2 different organizations will be looking for you by sunrise." "You're not exactly selling yourself as the safe option," Nyla said. "I'm not a safe option," he said, "but I'm the only option where you survive the week." The doors opened. He stepped out and turned and waited, not with urgency, not with pressure, but with the quiet patience of someone who has said what needs to be said, and understands that the decision that follows belongs entirely to the person making it. Nyla sat in the flickering light of the third car, with $73 in a handbag and a closed shelter in her future, and a broken lip still pulling at the corner of her mouth, and she thought about the apartment on Creston Street, and the 5 years inside it, and the 11 days of planning, and the $3 she had left in the envelope. She thought about what he had said. "I know the exact shape of the situation you're in." Nobody had known the shape of her situation in a very long time, maybe ever. She stood up. She walked to the doors. She stepped out onto the platform. The doors closed behind her. The car that met them at the street-level exit was black and unmarked, and the man standing beside it didn't speak, just opened the rear door with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough that ceremony had been stripped away. The rain was still coming down. Jae-hyun didn't hurry toward the car. He walked at the same pace he'd walked everywhere else tonight, and the rain hit his suit, and he appeared to register none of it. Nyla got in. The interior was warm and quiet and smelled like leather, and faintly cigarette smoke. Not current, old, absorbed into the material over time. The city moved past the tinted windows in horizontal streaks of light. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Dragon Tower." He said it without looking at her, watching the city through the glass. "It's where I work." "And live?" "And live." She absorbed this. "And I'm supposed to stay there." "I'm not keeping you anywhere," he said. "If you want to leave at any point, you can leave. But you should understand that the Varro Syndicate has 3 active surveillance teams operating within a 2-kilometer radius of this vehicle right now. They've been tracking my movements for 11 days. 11 days. The same number of days she had been planning her escape. Something about that coincidence of timing felt significant in a way she couldn't articulate. "Why?" she asked. "Because I have something they want," he said. "A port contract. The Southern Terminal. They've been trying to take it through business channels, political channels, and now less formal channels." He paused. "Your husband's information was meant to give them leverage over me. It didn't work the way they expected." "What did they think you'd told me?" "Nothing specific." Travis inflated his own importance significantly. Something moved in his jaw. Not quite contempt, not quite amusement, but the territory between. "He told them you had access to my financial records. He was, as I mentioned, wrong about what kind of leverage you represent." Nyla looked at her hands, at the bruised knuckle on her left hand from 3 days ago when she had reached the wrong way for something, and Travis had made a point about the reaching. "He thinks that making up information about other people is a way to buy himself safety. He's always done that. He lies up." "Lies up?" "Makes himself seem more connected than he is, more powerful, more dangerous." She paused. "It's what he does with me too. Tells people I have problems, that I'm difficult, that I'm unstable. So if I ever say anything contradictory to his version of events, there's already a case against me in the room." Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment. "He's been very thorough." 5 years, she said. He had time to be thorough. The car moved through a turn, and Nyla saw, through the rain-blurred window, the building she had heard described before in the context of the city's geography, without fully understanding what it represented. Dragon Tower stood at the northern edge of the financial district, and it was precisely what its name implied.
a glass fortress that rose above its neighbors with the self-assured height of something that did not need to justify its own existence. The lower floors were lit with the warm interior glow of a building in use. The upper floors were darker, more private. The peak was lost in low cloud. "Do a lot of people live there?" she asked. "My organization, security, staff." He paused. "People who need to be somewhere secure." She looked at him. "Is that often? People needing to be somewhere secure?" "More than I'd prefer." The car descended into an underground entrance and she felt the transition from the rain and the city into something enclosed and controlled. The garage was immaculate. She noticed that automatically, the absence of oil stains, the organized silence of it. Travis had always said that the way a man kept his garage told you everything about how he kept his commitments. She'd heard that said about Travis's garage too, by people who didn't know what happened in the apartment 2 floors above it. Different kind of keeping. The elevator required a key card and a code that Jae-hyun entered without looking at the panel. The ascent was smooth and fast and silent. The floor they stopped at was not the penthouse. She had expected the penthouse for some reason. But a floor midway up the building, a corridor with pale walls and dark wood floors, and the quality of quiet that comes from serious soundproofing. Jae-hyun led her past 2 men standing in the corridor who looked at her without expression and said nothing and returned their attention to whatever they had been attending to before. "Your room," he said, stopping at a door near the far end. He opened it. Inside was a space that was larger and quieter and more deliberately calm than anywhere she had slept in 5 years. A bed with dark linens, a window with the city below, the rain still moving across the glass. A bathroom with the door ajar, light on. On the bed, clothes folded, a sweater, dark gray, practical shoes. Underwear still in its packaging, a first aid kit. She looked at him. "I had someone prepare the room while we were in the car," he said. "The sizes are approximate. If anything doesn't fit, there are more options." "You had someone," she stopped. "You decided I was coming before I decided." "I prepared for the possibility." A pause. "There's a difference." She looked at the clothes on the bed, at the first aid kit, at the window with the city in it. She thought about the apartment on Creston Street, about the way Travis had always known where everything was, including her. "What do you want from me?" she said. "Tonight? Nothing. Sleep. Let someone look at your lip properly." He was already turning toward the door. "The rest is a conversation for when you've had food and rest and can think clearly." "I can think clearly now." He stopped in the doorway and looked back at her. The hallway light was behind him and his expression was difficult to read exactly, but what she could see in it was the same quality she'd seen on the train. That complete attention, that absence of performance. "You've been running on adrenaline and fear for approximately..." He glanced at the window, at the rain, making some internal calculation. "Long enough that your body is currently running 3 times its actual capacity. The crash will come within the next 2 hours. You should be in this room when it does." She wanted to argue. She was aware distantly that she should argue, that walking into a building owned by a man who ran a criminal empire and accepting a room and folded clothes and the offer of sleep was not rational behavior, was not the behavior of a woman being appropriately cautious about the situation she was in. But rational had run out 11 blocks back in the rain. "The door locks from the inside," Jae-hyun said. "My people will not enter without your invitation. If you need anything, the panel beside the door has an intercom." "And if I want to leave?" "The elevator code for the lobby is the same code I used coming up." He paused in the doorway. "I told you, I'm not keeping you anywhere." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said again. Not the same why as before, a different one, specific to this, to the room, the clothes, the first aid kit, the elevator code volunteered without being asked. Jae-hyun seemed to consider this. "Because you boarded my train, and your face was the face of someone who had already decided they had nothing left to lose," he said. "And in my experience, that is the most dangerous thing in the world. Not violence, not money. People who've been pushed to the place where they have nothing left to lose." He paused. "I prefer to give those people something to lose before the night gets worse." He left. She listened to his footsteps go quiet down the corridor. She stood in the room alone for a long time, with the rain on the window and the city below, and the first aid kit on the dark linened bed, and she breathed in through her nose to the count of 4 and out through her mouth to the count of 4. And she thought about the woman in the train window who had belonged to nobody, and the woman she was right now standing in a room in a building that belonged to a stranger who had named things about her situation with the precision that nobody had managed in 5 years. Then she sat down on the bed, opened the first aid kit, and began doing what she could about her lip. In the corridor outside, she heard footsteps and a voice, low, in Korean, brief, and then quiet. Downstairs, somewhere in the city, Travis Kane was walking away from the Aldgate platform with his hands loose at his sides and the memory of a conversation he had not expected. And the Vero Syndicate's surveillance teams were repositioning in the rain, and Meridian City was moving through its late hours the way it always did, indifferent to individual catastrophe. But in this room, in this building, with the first aid kit open in her lap, and the city lights bleeding through the rain on the glass, Nyla Mercer pressed gauze against her lip and held it there and felt, for the first time in 5 years, the particular and almost unbearable sensation of being in a space where nobody was going to come through the door. She hadn't realized until now how much of her energy had always gone to listening for footsteps. The silence, without that listening, was enormous. She didn't know yet that by morning Travis would have made his second and most catastrophic mistake, the one that turned a personal obsession into something the entire city would pay attention to, the one that changed the terms of everything she thought she understood about the night she had just survived. She didn't know yet what he had done and what it had set in motion, but the rain kept coming and the city held its breath, and somewhere in the building around her the machinery of something very old and very dangerous began moving in response to a threat it had been waiting to define. And Nyla Mercer, orphan, survivor, woman with $73 and nothing left to lose, slept. She woke to the sound of voices, not loud voices, not the kind that had trained her body to surface from sleep already braced, already calculating distance to the door, but voices at conversation pitch, businesslike, somewhere down the corridor. Male voices, 2 of them, discussing something in clipped exchanges that had the texture of people who had been solving problems together long enough that they'd stripped the language down to its functional minimum. Nyla lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling was not the ceiling of the apartment on Creston Street. The light coming through the window was the early gray of pre-dawn, not the particular orange of the street lamp outside Travis's bedroom window that she had memorized over 5 years of lying awake, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, calculating from its depth and pace whether it was safe to move. She sat up slowly. Her body gave her an inventory of itself, the way it always did after a bad few days, the bruised jaw, stiff and swollen along the line of the bone. The shoulder she'd landed on 6 nights ago when she'd moved wrong and Travis's patience had expired. The split lip, which the first aid kit had cleaned and closed with small adhesive strips before she'd fallen asleep, and which was pulling now with the specific tightness of something that was trying to heal. She was still in her clothes from the night before. The crimson sweater, dried now, stiff at the hem where the rain had soaked through. She'd meant to change into the gray sweater folded on the bed. She'd fallen asleep before she got there. The city through the window was just beginning to resolve from black into dark blue. Rain still moved across the glass, lighter now, more mist than storm. Meridian City from this height looked less like a city and more like a circuit board, an organized system of light and structure and movement, all of it purposeful, all of it connected, none of it paying attention to the woman in the window looking down at it. She had slept 5 hours. She felt it in her body. Not rested, but banked. Enough fuel in reserve to start thinking again. She changed into the gray sweater and the practical shoes and splashed water on her face in the bathroom that was cleaner than any bathroom she'd been in for years, and looked at herself in the mirror for the 10 seconds it took to confirm that the face looking back was still hers, still functional, still the face of a woman who had survived the night. Then she went to find Jae Hyun. The corridor was empty except for one man standing at the intersection near the elevator, compact, still, with the specific posture of someone paid to notice everything. He watched her approach without alarm and without welcome, just that flat professional attention. "Where is he?" she said. The man studied her for a moment. Then he tilted his head toward the far end of the corridor, toward a door she hadn't noticed the night before, slightly set back from the others. She knocked. "It's open." The room was a working space, not an office exactly, but a room that had accumulated the debris of ongoing decisions. A long table with documents spread across it, a laptop running something with dense columns of figures, a second screen showing a map of the Southern Port District with red overlays she didn't have the context to interpret. Chae-hyun was standing at the window with a coffee cup, still in yesterday's suit, minus the jacket. His shirt sleeves were pushed to the elbows. The dragon tattoo extended most of the way up his right forearm, not just the head she'd seen on his hand, but the full body of it, coiled and detailed, the tail disappearing under the sleeve. He looked at her and then at the clock on the wall and then back at her. "You slept 4 hours and 40 minutes. 5 hours, she said. I can see the camera time stamp from here." She absorbed this. "You monitor the corridor." "I monitor everything in this building. It's not personal." She decided to deal with that later. "You said there was a conversation, after food and rest. I've had both." He considered her for a moment, then moved to the table and picked up a document she couldn't read from where she was standing. "Travis called the Vero Syndicate at 2:14 this morning," he said. "He told them you have a relationship with me, a personal one." "That's a lie." "I know it's a lie." "They don't." He set the document down. "He told them you've been providing me with information about Vero's operations, names, locations, timelines. He said you've been feeding me intelligence through a back channel for 3 months. The coldness that moved through her wasn't surprise. She had known Travis for 5 years, and she understood the specific machinery of how he operated when he was frightened. He lied upward, always. When he was scared, he lied catastrophically. He's trying to make himself seem useful to them by giving them a target. Correct. And the target is me. The target is you. Jae-hyun's voice didn't soften around this. She appreciated that. She had learned to distrust softness. Varro has 2 lieutenants who handle security breaches. They are not careful men. They are effective men, which is a different thing. She sat down in the chair on the near side of the table because her legs had made the decision before she did. Her hands were in her lap, and she kept them still by will. What do I do? First thing, stop thinking about this as something happening to you. Start thinking about it as a situation with variables you can affect. I've been thinking about Travis Kane as a situation with variables I could affect for 5 years, and that approach produced a broken jaw and a closed women's shelter. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite acknowledgement, not quite apology, but the kind of slight recalibration that comes from someone who has pushed in a direction and gotten back accurate data. Fair is, he said. Let me be more specific. The Vero Syndicate won't move on you directly while you're in this building. It would be an act of war against my organization that they are not currently equipped to sustain. As long as you're inside Dragon Tower, you're not in immediate physical danger. But Travis is now a liability to them as well. A man who lies to criminal organizations about the intelligence value of people he's using as weapons tends not to remain useful for long. He'll escalate, Nyla said. That's what he does when he's cornered. He doesn't back down. He escalates. He finds a bigger threat to shelter behind. Jae-hyun looked at her steadily. Yes? Which means this gets worse before it gets better. Much worse, he said, with a directness she had not expected and found she needed. Which is why I want to know everything you know about the people Travis has been in contact with. The ones he would have approached before Vero. The ones he's been using to build leverage. I'm not an intelligence asset, she said flatly. No. But you lived with him for 5 years, and you're clearly not stupid and you paid attention because not paying attention wasn't safe. He pulled a chair out from the table and sat across from her and looked at her with that complete, undivided attention. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. Someone who has information that's relevant to a situation that is now also your situation. She held his gaze. And what do I get? What do you want? It was such a direct question that for a moment she didn't know what to do with it. Nobody had asked her that in 5 years in a context where the answer actually mattered. I want to not be a piece Travis uses to buy his way into rooms, she said. I want him to stop. I want to exist in this city as myself, not as his lie about me. Those are achievable, Jae-hyun said, if you help me understand the shape of the network he's built. And if I don't, then you leave this building with your $73 and the city deals with you the way the city deals with people who are in the middle of someone else's war. He said it without menace. Simple geography. I'm not threatening you. I'm describing the terrain. She looked at the map on the screen behind him, the red overlays on the port district. She thought about the 11 days and the $3 left in the envelope and the closed shelter on Crescent Avenue. She thought about the way Travis had been standing on that platform, patient, scanning, not panicked at all, because he had never really believed she would make it far enough to cost him anything. She began to talk. It took 40 minutes. She told him about the men Travis played cards with on the first Thursday of every month, two of whom she now understood were involved in the kind of transportation business that didn't appear on any manifest. She told him about the phone that Travis kept in the glove compartment of the car, the one with the blue case that was never plugged in and never discussed, and whose number she had memorized accidentally because she had seen it on the screen once, when she'd moved it to retrieve something else. She told him about the warehouse on Stanton, where Travis had driven twice in the months before she left, late at night, telling her he was going to meet a colleague, coming home with a particular kind of tight energy that she'd learned to stay out of the path of. Jaehyun listened. He asked questions that were short and specific, and he never asked her to elaborate beyond what was relevant. He made notes in a handwriting that was small and very dense. He didn't react visibly to any of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The phone number," he said. "The one with the blue case. Say it." She said it. He wrote it down, looked at it, then looked at her. Something had changed in the quality of his attention. More focused, sharper, the way a lens sharpens when something finally resolves. "What?" she said. "That number belongs to a man named Dario Shell. He's Varro's financial architect." A pause. "Travis has been talking directly to the money, not the muscle. That's not the behavior of someone who stumbled into this. That's the behavior of someone who was recruited." The cold feeling came back. "You're saying Travis didn't go to Varro?" "Varro came to Travis 6 weeks ago, which means they identified him as a pressure point on my organization 6 weeks ago." He set down the pen. "Which means someone inside my organization told them Travis Kane existed." Silence. Nyla became aware of the particular quality of the silence in the room, the way it had changed, the way it now contained something other than calculation, something with a little more heat in it. "Someone on your side," she said. "Someone on my side," he confirmed. His voice was exactly the same temperature it had been the whole conversation, but there was something underneath it now, something controlled and pressurized, the way heat is contained in a sealed system. "Someone who knew that Kane had a wife who was worth using, that I would encounter her, that—" He stopped, took a breath through his nose, slow and deliberate. "Someone who was positioning pieces before I knew there was a game." The room felt smaller. He stood and walked to the window again and stood with his back to her, looking at the gray dawn over the city, and she watched the set of his shoulders and thought that this was what the composed version of fury looked like in a person who had trained themselves not to show it. This particular stillness, this very controlled breathing, this way of putting the window between yourself and the room before you let anything surface. "Who knows your schedule?" she asked, because the question felt relevant, because she had spent 5 years learning to think about who knew what and when, because that kind of thinking had kept her functional. "Enough people," he said. "Who knew you'd be on that train last night?" He turned from the window. The expression on his face was something she hadn't seen there yet. Not anger, not exactly, but its first cousin. The kind of expression that arrives in the moment before a decision is made that won't easily be unmade. "Fewer," he said. "3 people." "Do you trust all 3? "I thought I did." The door opened. The man who came in was broad and Korean, somewhere in his mid-40s, with a face that had been rearranged at some point in the past by something harder than a fist. He looked at Nyla with an expression that contained no warmth and little pretense of any. "We have a problem," he said, in English, which she understood was for her benefit, or possibly a test of her reaction to it. "Min," Jaehyun said. His voice was back to its normal flatness. "Say it. The Stanton warehouse is gone." A pause. "Someone hit it at 4 a.m., took the contents. 3 of our people were on site." "Condition?" "2 will recover." Min did not elaborate on the third. "The crew that hit it used Varro's standard method. But the timing—" He stopped, glanced at Nyla. "She stays," Jaehyun said. Min's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The timing matches a tip that was called in from inside the building 2 hours ago. His eyes moved to Nyla again, and this time the implication was not ambiguous. She didn't call anyone, Shah Jae-hyun said. She was under camera surveillance from the moment she arrived. You trust the cameras? I built the cameras. You trusted the building, Min said, and let the weight of that sit for a moment. Nyla felt the heat of it. The accusation not quite stated but fully present, the logic of it not entirely dismissible. She was the unknown variable. She was the one who had arrived last night with injuries and a story and $73 and a husband already embedded with the enemy, and the simplest explanation for a leak that coincided with her arrival was her. She had been the unknown variable her whole life. She knew what it felt like to be the explanation everyone defaulted to. Look at the camera logs, she said, looking at Min directly. Timestamp everything. Whatever was called in, I was asleep in a room with a door I'd locked from the inside. Check it. Min looked at her for a long moment. She's not the leak, Jae-hyun said. The tip was called from inside the building, Min. Who in this building knew about Stanton? Another silence, longer and more pointed. Min said nothing. But something in his posture changed, a barely visible shift, a slight squaring, the physical equivalent of someone bracing. Say it, Jae-hyun said. Yoon, Min said. The name was short and flat and landed in the room like something dropped. Jae-hyun's face didn't move. He left the building at 3:40 this morning, Min continued. He hasn't checked in. His access card was used at the secondary exit, the one the cameras don't cover. The controlled stillness in Jae-hyun's body had a different quality now. She could see the effort in it, the degree to which the composure was a choice being remade every second. Yoon has been with me for 9 years, he said. Not an argument, a fact being examined. I know, Min said. 9 years. I know, Jay. Min's voice dropped its formality by 1 degree, just for that sentence. Jae-hyun turned back to the window. His right hand was flat against the glass, fingers spread, and she could see the dragon tattoo across his knuckles, and she could see from the whitening of the skin underneath them how hard the hand was pressing. Find him, Jae-hyun said. Min left. The room was very quiet. Nyla sat at the table with her hands in her lap and watched the man at the window rebuild the composure that 9 years of misplaced trust had just cracked. She knew about misplaced trust. She knew about the specific, nauseating arithmetic of looking back at 5 years and recalculating everything you thought you knew about a person and arriving at a sum that is simply and entirely wrong. She thought about saying something, about the way human beings are supposed to fill these particular silences with something useful, something that acknowledges the wound without making it bigger. She stayed quiet instead, because quiet was sometimes more useful than any available word. He knew about the train, Jae-hyun said, finally. Yeon! He arranged the car. He knew the schedule. A pause. He was the one who told me a woman matching your description had boarded at Caldwell Avenue. Nyla went still. He told you I was on that train. He'd been monitoring Travis Kane's household. Standard surveillance on Vero-adjacent contacts. Something moved through his jaw. He told me Travis Kane's wife had boarded the northbound train at 11:47 and appeared to be in distress. He recommended I go in person rather than send people. He stopped. He told me to sit beside you. The architecture of last night rearranged itself around a new structure. He set the meeting, Nyla said. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was an effort. Between you and me. He put you on that train. Why? Because if Travis Kane's wife was seen with me publicly, on a platform, in a car, entering this building, then everything Travis had already told Vero about her being my intelligence source becomes a story that has visible evidence attached to it. He turned from the window. Yoon didn't just leak the warehouse location. He built the entire scenario. Travis is a tool Yoon picked up and aimed. At both of us, she said. At both of us. She thought about this. About the woman on the train who had believed she was making a desperate choice and had in fact been a piece being moved by someone who understood the board better than either of them. About the $3 left in the envelope. About the closed shelter. About the particular horrible vertigo of discovering that the shape of your choices has been designed by someone else. What happens when you find Yoon? She asked. Jae-hyun looked at her steadily.
That's not a conversation for this room. It's my room too now, apparently. There are lines of my business you don't need to cross. I crossed them last night when I got off that train, she said, when your man Yoon put me on that platform with Travis watching and you walking toward him. I was the distraction. I was the thing that made the scene visible. Whatever happened on that platform, whatever Varro saw or heard, I was part of it. He didn't argue this. So what happens now, she said. For the second time since last night. Different question, different weight. Now Varro believes you are a significant intelligence asset connected to my organization, he said. Travis is a liability they will deal with, and someone who has been inside my organization for 9 years has handed them the tools to dismantle a significant portion of what I've spent 12 years building. 12 years, she said, in this city. 12 years. She looked at the map behind him, the red overlays on the port, the density of whatever was represented there. She thought about running. She thought about the lobby code he'd given her, freely, the night before. She thought about the city below, the Varro surveillance teams repositioning in the rain, Travis Kane walking away from Aldgate Station with a phone in his jacket that connected directly to the man who had turned both of them into instruments of someone else's plan. She thought about what Jae Hyun had said on the train, people who've been pushed to the place where they have nothing left to lose. I prefer to give those people something to lose before the night gets worse. He'd been manipulated into saying it, into the entire encounter, but the words had still been his. She stood up from the chair. I want to help, she said. He looked at her. I'm not naive about what that means, she continued. I'm not asking to be protected. I'm not asking for anything you haven't already. She stopped, recalibrated. I know the shape of Travis's mind. I know how he builds leverage and how he panics and what he does when he's cornered and how he talks his way into rooms he shouldn't be in. I know the warehouse on Stanton and the card players on the first Thursday and the blue case phone and Dario's shell. She met his eyes. Use it. You understand what side of this you're on if you do, he said. It's not a line you can walk back. I know. Nyla. He said her name for the first time. She hadn't noticed until now that he hadn't used it before. You walked out of an apartment 3 nights after... He stopped, looked briefly at her jaw. You had $73 and a plan that didn't survive contact with the first stop. You're not in a position where I can tell you this is safe or temporary or... I know what I'm walking into, she said. I've been walking into situations I couldn't fully see my whole life. At least this time someone's showing me the map. He looked at her for a long moment. You should eat something, he said. Is that a yes? It's an acknowledgement that the conversation isn't over. He moved toward the door. And that you need to eat before we have the rest of it. In the corridor, the quiet man who monitored everything had been replaced by 2 quiet men, and the building around them had the new charged quality of a place in which the understanding of an internal threat had just reconfigured every relationship in standing order in line of sight. And somewhere in the city, a man named Yoon, who had spent 9 years building trust, was moving towards something neither of them could yet see. And in the Varro Syndicate's Eastern Operations Center, 3 kilometers south and 40 stories down, a phone buzzed with a message that contained 3 words and a location and a time. And the man who read it looked at it for a long moment before typing back, confirmed. Send the brothers. And the brothers, 2 men who had never once in their careers made the mistake of leaving a witness, began to move. The brothers arrived at Dragon Tower at 7:22 in the morning. Nobody saw them come in because they didn't come in through the front. They came through the loading dock on the building's north face, the service entrance that handled deliveries and maintenance contractors, and the kind of routine traffic that security teams stopped looking at after the first 100 uneventful times. They wore gray coveralls with the logo of an HVAC company that had a legitimate contract with the building, a contract that had been arranged 14 months ago, quietly, by a man named Yoon, who had understood even then that patience was the most expensive weapon in any arsenal. Jae Hyun was at the kitchen table on the residential floor when his phone vibrated with the building's internal alert. He looked at the screen. His face didn't change. He looked at Nyla across the table, at the coffee she was holding with both hands, at the half-eaten toast on the plate in front of her. Get up, he said. His voice had a new quality, not louder, stripped, the way a wire sounds when the insulation comes off. The same cable, the same current, but nothing between it and contact anymore. Nyla was already standing. 5 years of living with Travis Kane had calibrated her nervous system to respond to that particular vocal frequency before her conscious mind caught up with what it meant. Her body understood, get up at a register that bypassed language. He crossed to the kitchen counter and opened the cabinet beneath the sink and retrieved something from behind the cleaning supplies. A handgun, compact, matte black, already holstered, and clipped it to his waistband with the efficiency of someone returning a tool to its place rather than arming themselves for the first time. He pulled his shirt over it. 2 men in the building, he said, looking at his phone. Loading dock entry, coveralls. Varro, the brothers. A beat. Renard and Cole masked. They've been doing this work for Varro for 6 years. They are not careful men. She remembered what he'd said earlier. They are effective men, which is a different thing. Where do we go? Up, he said. Not down. The loading dock means they want us moving toward exits. Going up takes us to the penthouse level, which has 3 additional security measures and direct line of sight for my best people. He was already moving toward the corridor. She followed, close, and noted the way he moved through the building. Not running, not panicked, but with a density of purpose that made the air around him feel pressurized, like he was moving through a space he was simultaneously assessing for danger and claiming as territory. The elevator was wrong. He bypassed it without breaking stride, pushed through the door to the emergency stairwell, began ascending. She was right behind him, her hand on the metal railing, the sound of their footsteps on the concrete steps absorbed by the stairwell's indifferent acoustics. Min is already on the penthouse level, Jae-hyun said, not looking back at her. 3 others. If the brothers make it to floor 31, they'll meet resistance that stops them. If, she said. If. 6 floors. 7. She was breathing harder than she wanted to be, the shoulder injury complaining, the bruised jaw sending small bright signals of pain every time her foot hit a step and jarred her skeleton. She ignored it. She had been ignoring pain signals for 5 years. She was good at it. They came out on floor 31 into a corridor that was different from the residential levels. Wider, with a quality of deliberate formality that said this was where power was conducted rather than lived. 2 men she hadn't seen before were positioned at the far end. They registered Jae-hyun with a slight shift of posture that was not quite a nod but contained the acknowledgement of one, and looked at Nyla with the same flat professional assessment she was learning to expect from everyone in this building. Min was at the end of the corridor, phone to his ear, and when he saw Jae-hyun, his expression assembled itself into something that carried information before he spoke. He lowered the phone. "They're not alone," he said. Jae-hyun stopped walking. "How many?" "6 total. The brothers and 4 others. They split at floor 14. 2 went east toward the mechanical room." A pause. Just one, precisely sized. "Jay, they know the building." The silence that followed was the kind that has mass. "Yoon gave them a blueprint," Jae-hyun said. It wasn't a question. More than that. Min's jaw was tight enough that the muscle in his cheek was visible, working. The access codes were changed at 3 a.m. this morning. Standard rotation. Yoon was supposed to issue the new codes to the team. He stopped. "He issued the old ones," Jae-hyun said. "To our people. Yes." The implication took a moment to fully land, and when it did, Nyla felt it in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the specific cold shock of understanding a trap after you're already inside it. The security team operating on this floor had access codes that no longer worked. If the situation degraded and they needed to lock the building down, to seal corridors, to trigger the secondary security measures he'd mentioned, they were operating with keys that fit nothing. "The penthouse measures," she said. Both men looked at her. "The 3 additional security measures on the penthouse level," she said. "They run on the same code system?" Min looked at Jae-hyun. "Yes," Jae-hyun said. "Then going up was what they wanted," she said. "Same as the loading dock." "They're hurting." Another silence, different in texture from the last, this one containing the particular quality of 2 men who are very good at what they do, confronting the fact that someone has been better. Jae-hyun turned to Min. "Manual override. The mechanical room. That's where 2 of them are heading. Then we get there first." Min made a sound that was not quite a protest and not quite agreement and moved fast toward the stairwell. Jae-hyun looked at Nyla.
Stay between me and Min, he said. Don't move away from either of us, regardless of what you hear. If we get separated— We don't get separated, she said. He looked at her for 1 second. Something passed through his expression that was too fast to name. Then he moved. They were on the stairwell again, going down this time, fast, the rhythm of it different from the ascent, more urgent, more percussive, the concrete stairwell throwing back the sound of their movement in a way that felt like the building itself tracking their position. Nyla ran on instinct and muscle memory and the deep-seated physical knowledge of someone who had learned to move through dangerous space quickly, and she thought about nothing except the back of Jae-hyun's shoulder in front of her and the sound of Min's footsteps below. They reached floor 14. The mechanical room was on the east side, through a door marked with maintenance signage. The corridor was dim. Half the lights were out, and she understood immediately that this was not a malfunction, that someone had been here recently and made a choice about light. Min went first through the door, low, fast, to the left. A sound. Impact. Grappling. A brief, ugly exchange that Nyla didn't fully see in the dimness. Then one heavy sound of something meeting the floor and staying there. Min straightened. His lip was bleeding. He looked at his hand for a second, then at Jae-hyun. 1, he said. The other got to the override panel. The panel was on the far wall, a gray metal box set into the concrete, already open. A man in gray coveralls was at it with a device connected to the terminal by a cable. And when he heard them, he turned and his face ran a rapid calculation, and he pulled the cable free and bolted for the secondary door at the far end. Min went after him. Jae-hyun went to the panel. Nyla watched the door Min had gone through and listened to the sounds of the building and thought about the 4 men in the building besides the one on the floor and the 2 in the mechanical room, and thought about the trajectory and said, the brothers. Still on the lower floors, Jae-hyun said, hands on the panel, working. You don't know that. He stopped, looked at her. They split the team on purpose, she said. 4 people to make noise in the building, occupy your security, force you to respond. The brothers go somewhere else while your attention is on the 4. She thought about Travis, about the specific architecture of a plan built by someone who understands misdirection, about the way Yoon had arranged everything, the platform, the meeting, the building entry, the codes, with a patience and a structural intelligence that didn't operate reactively. Where are they actually going? Jae-hyun's hands had stopped on the panel. His eyes were moving, running the building's geography in his head. The server room, he said. Which floor? 8. He left the panel and she followed, and they were back in the stairwell going down again, faster than before, and she was aware that her body was close to the edge of what it could sustain at this pace with these injuries. But the awareness was distant, behind the immediate physical necessity of keeping up with a man who moved like someone who had been navigating dangerous buildings since before she was old enough to understand what danger was. Floor 8. The server room was behind a door that required a keycard and a code, and the keycard worked because this door ran on a different system, an older one that Yoon either hadn't known about or hadn't reached yet. Jae-hyun had it open in 4 seconds, and they were inside, and the room was cold and loud with the constant breath of the cooling systems, and the server racks stood in rows like a dark congregation. They were not alone. The man who turned at the sound of the door was not wearing coveralls. He was wearing the same clothes as last night, dark jacket, dark pants, and his face was one she hadn't seen before, but the way Jae-hyun went absolutely still at the sight of him told her everything about who he was. Yoon, Jae-hyun said. The man was in his late 40s, compact, with a stillness that had a different quality from Jae-hyun's. Not composure, but the stillness of someone who has already used up the part of themselves that felt things like regret and is operating now on the far side of that expenditure. He was holding a drive attached to the nearest server rack. He had not yet extracted it. Jae, Yoon said. He said the name the way Min had said it earlier, the shortened version, the version that belonged to a different kind of relationship. I didn't think you'd come down. You underestimated the company I was keeping, Jae-hyun said. Yoon's eyes moved to Nyla. His expression didn't change, but there was a brief involuntary quality of assessment in the look, a recalculation. Kane's wife, he said. My name is Nyla Mercer, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. You figured out the misdirection, Yoon said, still looking at her. The brothers. You built it like Travis builds things, she said. Noise at the top, target somewhere else while people are looking up. You know Travis Kane's methodology. I know what it looks like when someone designs a trap around other people's attention, she said. I've been the object of that kind of attention for 5 years. Yoon looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Jae-hyun. Pull the drive, Jae-hyun said quietly, and I will burn every piece of leverage you built with Vero before sundown. You can't burn what's already transferred, Yoon said. The server room went very cold in a way that had nothing to do with the cooling systems. Say that again, Jae-hyun said.
Last night, while your cameras were watching the new guest and your team was repositioning after Aldgate. Yoon's voice was flat, a man reporting operational details. The port contract documentation, the financial architecture, the names and locations of every safe house, every secondary contact, You transferred it last night, Jae-hyun said, to 3 separate Vero-controlled servers, encrypted, already distributed. A pause. The drive in my hand is the last piece. The identity documentation on your network assets. I came back for it. Something shifted in Yoon's face. Not guilt, not exactly, but an acknowledgement that guilt would have been the appropriate response in a different version of himself. I needed more time than I had. Jae-hyun said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had reached a register she hadn't heard from him yet. Not louder, but fundamentally lower, like something that lives at the bottom of a very deep thing. 9 years. I know. You were there when we built this from 12 people in a storage unit on Brennan Street. He stopped, took a breath. The controlled precision of it was the most frightening thing she had seen in this building. Why? The question was not angry. It was something worse than angry. It was the question of someone standing in the wreckage of a decade, looking for a shape that explains the ruin. Yoon looked at him. For the first time, something moved in his face that was not operational. Something old and tired and sorry in a way that had clearly come too late to function as anything useful. My son, he said. Silence. Varo has my son, Yoon said, has had him for 4 months. In 4 months, they told me to do one thing. One piece of information, one door opened, then the next thing, then the next. His voice had lost its flatness. Not broken, controlled, barely, like a fracture in material that is still holding its shape by habit. By the time I understood what I had given them enough that refusing the next request was, there was no next refusal. There was only the next request. Nobody moved. How old? Jae-hyun said. 23. Where? I don't know. Each contact they proved he was alive and refused location. Yoon's hand on the drive was white-knuckled. I'm sorry, Jay. I understand what that means right now. I understand what it costs. He stopped. It means nothing sufficient, but it's what I have. Neela was watching Jae-hyun. She was watching the specific physical difficulty of processing a betrayal that had just grown a second layer. Not treachery from loyalty's absence, but treachery from a different loyalty entirely. She understood something about that, about the way a person can be trapped by love into doing things that destroy other people, about the way someone can weaponize the thing you cannot protect in order to make you into a weapon yourself. She understood Travis. She understood leverage. She understood the architecture of it from the inside. You should have told me, Jae-hyun said. They told me if I did, I know what they told you. A pause. You should have told me anyway. Yoon closed his eyes for a moment, just one, then opened them. Yes. The door behind them opened. Min came through it with a cut above his eyebrow and the specific energy of someone who has just run from somewhere fast. He took in the room in one sweep, processed Yoon at the server rack, processed Jae-hyun's posture, processed Nyla standing beside him, and said, The brothers are in the building, floor 12. They're not coming for the servers. Then what? Jae-hyun started. Min looked at Nyla. The cold landed in her stomach before the thought was complete. They're coming for her, Jae-hyun said. Not a question. Travis Kane sent a secondary instruction to Vero at 5 a.m., Min said. We pulled it off the intercept 20 minutes ago. I was trying to get to you. His eyes stayed on Nyla. He told them she has a physical document, a ledger.
He said she took it from his apartment before she ran. Records of payments between him and Shell, transactions that could be used against Vero's financial operation. A beat. He said she's been carrying it as insurance. Nyla stared at him. I don't have a ledger. I don't have anything. I left with $73 and a handbag with a broken zipper. I know that, Min said. Varo doesn't. Travis told them it exists and told them you have it, and now there are 2 men on floor 12 of this building, and their job is to find it. He stopped. They're not going to believe you when you tell them you don't have it. She thought about his brothers and what Jae-hyun had said. They are effective men. Effective men with a brief that told them she was carrying something valuable. Effective men who would not stop looking until the looking was resolved by finding or by certainty. Travis had done this. Travis, who had spent 6 weeks building himself into a position of usefulness to Vero, and had now, cornered and desperate, created a story about her that put 2 killers in the same building. Travis, who had weaponized her the way Vero had weaponized Yoon's son. Travis, who had spent 5 years learning exactly how to use her as a tool and had not stopped using her just because she'd left the apartment. She felt something shift in her chest. Not the cold shock of fear, but something harder. Something that had been accumulating since the platform at Aldgate, since the first aid kit on the dark linen bed, since the map with the red overlays and the coffee at the kitchen table, and the sound of Jae-hyun's voice stripped down to its bare current in the corridor an hour ago. She felt the last of the woman who apologized for the space she occupied dissolve out of her like heat, leaving an open window. Tell me what the brothers need to believe, she said. All 3 men looked at her. If they're looking for a ledger, she said, then we give them a reason to stop looking. She held Jae-hyun's gaze. You said, I know the shape of Travis's mind. You said use it. She paused. I want to be in the room when they find me. Not hiding. In the room. I want to be the reason this ends on our terms instead of theirs. The room's cooling systems breathed in and out. Jae-hyun looked at her with that complete, undivided attention. The same attention from the train, the same quality she had been unable to name then and could name now because she had had enough time with it to understand what it was. The attention of a man who does not look away from the true shape of things. You've never done anything like this, he said. I've been surviving men like Travis and men like Vero's brothers my entire life, she said. The only difference is that this time I know I'm doing it. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he looked at Yoon. The drive, he said, extending his hand. Yoon looked at the drive in his own hand for a long moment. Then he placed it in Jae-hyun's palm. My son, he said. I'll find him, Jae-hyun said, after this is done. He looked at Min. Take Yoon downstairs. Keep him secure. He looked at the drive. And get me a Tianakien. The drive went into Jae-hyun's jacket pocket, and he pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted 11 seconds, spoke 4 sentences in Korean, and ended it. 30 seconds. He said to Nyla. She didn't ask 30 seconds until what? She stood in the cold server room with the cooling systems breathing around her, and she listened to the building, and she thought about what she had just volunteered to do, and she did not allow herself to think about it too carefully, because careful thinking right now was the same as paralysis. And paralysis was the same as dying in a building on behalf of a lie. Travis Kane had told to buy himself another 48 hours of usefulness. She thought instead about her hands. She looked at them. Bruised knuckle on the left, the adhesive strip on her lip, the gray sweater's cuffs pushed back from her wrists. These were her hands. They had made breakfast and carried groceries and flinched away from things coming at her face and held the sides of a sink at 3 a.m. while she talked herself down from the edge of whatever the edge was. They had also, tonight, held a coffee cup and pointed at a map and pressed against a stairwell railing while running. And they were going to do one more thing before this morning was over. She breathed. In through her nose to the count of 4. Out through her mouth to the count of 4. The door opened and a woman came through it. Mid-30s, compact, dark hair pulled back with a no-argument efficiency, carrying a small case. She looked at Neela and looked at Jae-hyun and said, Tell me what you need. A document, he said. Something that looks like financial records, physical. Something a woman would carry in a handbag as insurance. The woman opened her case. Inside were tools that Nyla didn't have the vocabulary for. Printing equipment, paper stock, a laminating device smaller than anything she'd seen do that job. Give me 8 minutes, the woman said. You have 5, Jae-hyun said. She began working without acknowledging the reduction. Jae-hyun looked at Nyla. The brothers will not be patient. When they find you, they will want the document immediately, and they will not accept uncertainty. Then I won't give them uncertainty. They will also... He stopped. Something moved through his jaw. They will not be gentle about confirming you have it before you hand it over. She understood what he was telling her. I know what rough handling feels like, she said. I've been managing my reactions to it for 5 years. I won't break the scene. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, something between professional assessment and something older and less clinical that he was actively containing. The moment they have the document in hand, my people move. You will hear them before you see them. When it happens, get low and get behind something solid and stay there. What counts as something solid? In a Dragon Tower corridor, most of the walls are reinforced. The support columns are concrete. He paused. Avoid the glass. She almost laughed. The laugh didn't make it all the way to the surface, but she felt it move through her chest, dark and a little wild, the kind of response the body generates when the situation exceeds the normal range of its emotional categories. Where? She said. Floor 12. East Corridor. There's a room they'll be using as a staging point. Maintenance access, no cameras, which is exactly why they'll have chosen it. He looked at his phone. They've been in position for 6 minutes. They'll start moving soon. If we're going to control when and where they find you, we need to be ahead of their timeline. So we go now. You go now. I position the team. He looked at her steadily. You walk in alone. The statement landed. Alone, she said. If they see me or my people first, they run or they escalate on a timeline we don't control. They need to find you the way they expect to find you. A woman in over her head, alone, carrying something valuable she doesn't know how to use. She thought about this, about the woman on the train who had been exactly that, a woman in over her head with nothing to use, and about the distance between that woman and the one standing in a server room choosing to walk toward the brothers instead of away from them. Okay, she said. The woman with the case looked up. Done. She held out a document, 2 pages, folded, worn at the crease, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times, the printing dense with figures and codes and notations that Nyla couldn't fully read, but that had the convincing texture of something generated by someone who understood what financial records looked like from the inside. Nyla took it, folded it, put it in the handbag with the broken zipper. Chae-hyun walked her to the stairwell door. Nyla, he said. She was already through the door. She looked back at him. Don't improvise past what we discussed. I know. And don't... He stopped. Don't what? Don't let them convince you that you're alone in the building, he said. You won't be able to see us. That doesn't mean we're not there. She held his gaze for 1 second. Then she went down the stairs. Floor 12. The east corridor was dim in a way that floor 31 had not been. The overhead lighting reduced to one working fixture at the far end, the rest either turned off or out. The floor smelled of concrete dust and stale air, the way building floors smell when they're between tenants and haven't been fully occupied in a while. Her footsteps on the hard floor sounded deliberate to her own ears, too loud, announcing her arrival to everything in the space. She walked to the center of the corridor and stopped. She stood there. She waited. She became aware of her own heartbeat, not because it was fast, though it was, but because the silence in the corridor was so complete that the pulse in her throat was the loudest thing she could hear. She regulated her breathing. She held the handbag strap with both hands, in front of her, the way a person holds something when they're frightened, and the thing they're holding is the most important thing they have. She thought about Travis on the platform at Aldgate, about the way he had stood there, patient, scanning. She thought about the 5 years of learning to read his patience as a threat, about all the evenings she had stood in a room waiting for a storm that was definitely coming and unable to determine when. She had always been waiting for what was coming. Tonight she had walked toward it herself. The door at the far end of the corridor opened. They came through it the way men like that always move. Not loudly, not with the swagger of people who want to be seen coming, but with an economy of motion that was its own kind of announcement. The first one was taller, older, with a face that had been occupied for a long time by the specific blankness of someone who has professionalized violence to the point that it no longer requires an emotional state. The second was shorter, faster in the way he moved, with restless eyes that swept the corridor in a single practiced arc before landing on her. They stopped 6 feet away. She didn't move. "Nyla Kane," the taller one said. "Mercer," she said. "My name is Nyla Mercer." He looked at her for a moment. The correction didn't interest him. "You have something for us." "I have something," she said. "I'm not sure it's for you." The shorter one moved slightly to his left, an angle adjustment that put her at the center point between them without making it obvious that this was what it was doing. She noticed it. She noted it, and she held still, and she did not look toward the empty stretches of corridor on either side, because looking toward where your backup is standing is how you tell everyone in the room where your backup is standing. "The ledger," the tall one said. "It's not a ledger," she said. "Travis calls it that because Travis doesn't understand what he was looking at." She let a pause live. "It's a transfer record. 31 transactions between an account registered to Dario Shell and 3 shell companies that don't exist anymore. Dates, amounts, routing numbers." She paused again. "The kind of thing that's worthless if you know about it in advance and can erase it. The kind of thing that's very valuable if it arrives somewhere before you know it's been sent." The taller one's expression didn't change, but something in the quality of his stillness shifted. She had landed on something real. She could tell because the shift was involuntary. The slight recalibration of someone who has walked into a room expecting one kind of problem and found an adjacent, more complicated one. "Hand it over," he said. "Tell me what happens to Travis Kane," she said. "That's not your negotiation." "He told you I'm carrying insurance," she said. "He told you I've been feeding information to Jae Hyun for 3 months. Both of those things are lies that Travis invented 6 weeks ago to make himself seem useful to your organization." She looked at the tall one, directly, with the particular stillness she had been learning from the man in the Navy suit over the past several hours. "You're here to clean up a problem. The problem isn't me. I'm the person Travis used to buy himself into your organization, and I'm the person he's currently using to buy himself more time. He gave you a story about a ledger because he's out of real information." You don't know what he's out of. "I know Travis Kane comprehensively," she said. "I know what he looks like when he's spent and trying not to show it. He sent you here because Varro is running out of patience with him, and this was the last piece of value he could fabricate. There is no back channel between me and Jae Hyun's operation. There never was. Travis invented that to explain why his intelligence was degrading." The shorter one spoke for the first time. "You're protecting Jae Hyun." "I'm not protecting anyone," she said. "I'm giving you accurate information about the source of the inaccurate information you've been operating on for 6 weeks, because I am not interested in being the last lie Travis Kane tells before someone with better judgment than him figures out he's been fabricating." She let that sit. "The document I have is real. The channel Travis described is not. If your organization makes decisions based on what Travis Kane says about me, those decisions will be wrong." A silence. The shorter one was looking at her with something that was not quite respect and not quite suspicion, but lived somewhere between them, the way a person looks at something they hadn't expected to find doing what it's doing. "Show us the document," the tall one said. This was it. She reached into the handbag with both hands, deliberate, visible, no sudden movements. Her fingers found the folded paper. She drew it out slowly and held it extended, and the tall one took 2 steps forward and reached for it. His hand closed on the document. She released it. And then the corridor was very loud and very full. It happened faster than her mind could fully sequence. Sound first. The controlled burst of movement from 3 points simultaneously, Jae Hyun's people, coming from the east stairwell door and the maintenance access and a ceiling panel that dropped with a percussion she felt in her sternum. The tall one had a half-second of reaction time and used it to turn toward the nearest threat rather than hold his position, and that half-second was precisely the measurement of the miscalculation. Nyla was already moving. Low, as instructed, toward the nearest support column, her shoulder hitting the cold concrete as she went down and pressed her back against it and made herself as small as the column would allow, while the corridor behind her rearranged itself with a speed and controlled violence that she did not watch and did not need to watch. It lasted less than a minute. She knew because she was counting. The pamphlet breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, and she counted the seconds, and she pressed her back against the concrete column, and she kept her eyes on the far wall, and she did not let her body do what it wanted to do, which was to run. Then it was quiet. Hae-hyun's voice from somewhere to her right, in Korean, a single command, a response. Then his footsteps. She could identify them now, the particular density of them on a hard floor. He came around the column and crouched beside her. "You're all right?" he said. She assessed herself, shoulder aching from hitting the concrete, hands shaking again, heart rate at a level that she was going to feel in her neck for the next hour. Alive. "Yes," she said. He was looking at her face with that complete attention. "You didn't improvise." "I almost did," she said. "Almost is discipline," he said. He helped her up, her legs held. The corridor behind him was... She looked, because looking was better than not looking, because 5 years of not looking had made the looking harder and harder, and she was done with that. Contained. 2 men against the far wall, hands secured. The document in the tall one's hand, retrieved now, back in the hands of one of Jae-hyun's people. "The brothers," she said, "in custody." He looked at his phone. "The 4 on the upper floors have been dealt with." A pause. "Min has Yoon downstairs. Nobody else in the building. We are..." His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His expression did the thing again, not changing, but the quality behind it shifting, the pressure behind the composure increasing by 1 precise degree. "What?" she said. He turned the phone so she could see it. A message. 3 lines. The number she recognized from the morning, the intercept line Min had described. Travis Kane. Entered building. Basement level. He has a weapon and 2 Varo soldiers you haven't accounted for. He says he won't leave without her. She stared at the screen. The man who had spent 5 years making her small was in the basement of the building she had survived this morning, with a weapon and 2 men and the specific obsessive certainty of someone who has never accepted that a thing he considers his property has the right to not be his property anymore. She thought about the platform at Aldgate, his hands loose at his sides, patient, scanning, systematic, not panicked, never panicked, because he had never fully believed she would cost him anything. She felt something resolve in her chest. Not rage. She'd had rage before, and Travis had taught her that rage without direction just destroys the person carrying it. What resolved in her chest was something colder and more structural. The decision of a person who has identified the last obstacle between themselves and the version of their life that exists on the other side of this morning. She handed the phone back to Jae-hyun. "Tell me the basement layout," she said. He looked at her. "Every entry, every exit, every place a man would stand if he wanted sightlines on all of them," she said. "Travis picks the position with the most control and the most exits. He always does. He taught me that himself." She met his eyes. "Tell me where he'll be standing, and I'll walk to it." "Nyla, he came for me," she said. "Not for you, not for the document, not for whatever Vero promised him. He came for me because I left, and nobody who leaves is supposed to survive leaving." Her voice didn't break. She had expected it to. It didn't. "If I don't walk into that basement, he burns the building down looking for me, and everyone in it pays the cost of his obsession." Jae-hyun held her gaze for a long, still moment. "The northeast corner," he said. "Large support column. Sightline to both stairwell doors and the service elevator." He paused. "He'll be behind the column, not in front of it. He'll want to see you before you see him." "I know," she said. "He always needs to see me first." She straightened the gray sweater. She checked the strap on the handbag. She pressed 2 fingers briefly against the adhesive strip on her lip. Checking, not nervous, just checking, and breathed once more through her nose to the count of 4. "I'll be 30 seconds behind you," Jae-hyun said. "I know," she said again. She walked to the stairwell. She descended alone. The basement was cold and large and smelled of concrete and old machinery. The building's mechanical infrastructure running through it in pipes and conduits along the ceiling and the walls, the kind of space that exists to make the floors above it function and is never designed to be inhabited. Single overhead lights at intervals, industrial, casting more shadow than illumination. She walked to the center of the space and stopped. Silence. Then from the northeast corner, from behind the large support column exactly where Jae-hyun had said he would be, Nyla, Travis's voice. In this space, in this particular darkness, it sounded exactly the same as it had always sounded in the apartment on Creston Street. The controlled, private timbre of someone who is speaking only to the person he is speaking to, who understands that a voice at this register carries the weight of all the previous times it has been used in private spaces to establish that there is no witness, no appeal, no court of any kind above the moment currently being constructed. For 1 second, just one, she felt the old architecture try to reassemble around her. The learned compression, the apologetic stance, the rapid assessment of his emotional weather and what it would cost her. 1 second, then it was gone. She turned to face the column. "Travis," she said. He stepped out from behind it, and she looked at him and saw, for the first time, the true dimensions of what 5 years had actually been made of. A man in a gray jacket with a weapon at his side, and 2 men flanking him, and eyes that contained beneath the controlled surface the specific terror of someone who has built his entire sense of self on a foundation that has just been revealed to have no depth. He looked at her standing in the middle of the basement floor, and she watched him understand, in real time, that the woman in front of him was not the woman he had come to. He looked at her, and she watched him understand in real time that the woman in front of him was not the woman he had come to retrieve. It took him 4 seconds. She counted them. 4 seconds for Travis Kane to run the inventory of the person standing in the center of the basement floor and arrive at a sum that didn't match the figure he'd been carrying in his memory. The woman who flinched, who compressed herself, who calculated the weather in his eyes before speaking, who had spent 5 years learning to make herself into the exact shape of what would cost her the least. That woman was not here. The woman in the basement of Dragon Tower stood with her feet at shoulder width and her hands loose at her sides, and her eyes on his face with a quality of attention that was new and that he could not immediately categorize, and that she could see frightened him in a way he was furiously trying not to show. The 2 men flanking him shifted slightly, reading his reaction, calibrating to it the way men in that position calibrate to the person they're working for. Travis recovered. She watched him do it, watched the fear get pressed down and the familiar surface reassemble, the controlled private voice, the expression of patient authority that had always preceded the worst evenings on Creston Street. "You look different," he said. "I've been sleeping," she said, without one ear open. Something moved in his jaw. "Come on, Nyla. Look at this. Look at where you are. In a building full of criminals, in the basement, in the dark. This is what you traded me for." "I didn't trade you for anything," she said. "I left. Those are different transactions." "You left with $73, he said, and the way he said it, the specific knowledge of the amount, the deliberate deployment of it as a demonstration of how thoroughly he'd always known her every movement, was designed to do what it had always been designed to do, remind her that he had always been watching, always been present in the architecture of her life, always been the ceiling and the walls and the floor. "You had nowhere to go. You had nothing." "I had enough," she said. "Enough." He said this word with the precise contempt of someone who has always defined sufficiency for other people. "Enough to run to a Korean gangster you met on a train. Very dignified. You've been selling information about him to his enemies for 6 weeks, she said. You've been using my name to buy yourself into rooms you have no business being in. You told a criminal organization that I was feeding them intelligence for 3 months, which is a lie you invented to make yourself seem more useful than you are." She held his gaze. "Don't talk to me about dignity." His eyes narrowed. "Where is it?" "Where's what?" "The document. The transfer records." "Don't." He took 1 step forward. The 2 men moved with him, the instinctive geometry of a group accustomed to moving together. "Shell told me you'd found it, that you'd been smart enough to take it when you left." "Dario Shell told you I had a document," she said, "because Dario Shell needed you to believe you still had something to offer. You were becoming a liability. He gave you a mission to keep you moving in a direction where you'd be useful until you weren't." She paused. "You've been managed, Travis, for 6 weeks. By people who are very good at managing people like you." His face did something complicated. The surface cracked, just slightly, the controlled expression fracturing along a line she recognized. The line that appeared when he encountered information that contradicted the story he'd told himself about his own intelligence and capability. The story that had always been the load-bearing wall of his entire construction of himself. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said.
The document doesn't exist, she said. You invented it, or Shell invented it for you, and you've been chasing it into a building full of people who have been waiting for you to arrive. She kept her voice level, not taunting, factual. Varro's men are in custody on the upper floors. The brothers are gone. You walked in here with 2 men and a story that has no ending that works for you.
He was very still now. The kind of still she had learned over 5 years was more dangerous than movement. The stillness before the weather broke. Last time, he said. His voice had dropped to the register she knew, the private register, the one with no performance in it. Come with me and this stops being complicated. It stopped being complicated the night I left, she said. You just haven't caught up yet. He moved. He covered the distance between them faster than she'd fully anticipated. Travis had always been faster than he looked. It was one of the first things she'd learned. And his hand closed on her wrist and she felt the grip she had felt dozens of times in the apartment on Creston Street. And her body tried to run its old response, the compression, the stillness, the management of the situation by reducing herself inside it. She didn't let it. She pulled, hard, in the direction of the grip rather than against it, toward him, which he hadn't expected because in 5 years she had always pulled away. And the unexpected direction broke his balance by a single degree, and she used that degree, drove her elbow into the space his movement had opened, felt the impact register in his grip, felt the grip loosen. She stepped back. He came at her again, and the lights in the basement went up, all of them, full, simultaneous, the industrial overhead banks flooding the space with hard white light that hit every shadow at once, and Travis stopped. Jae-hyun came through the stairwell door, not running, walking. With 6 people behind him, moving with the organized, quiet efficiency of people who have done this in darker and more complicated places than a basement with overhead lighting, and a man who has just been stripped of his 2 flanking soldiers by people who emerged from the service corridor while his attention was on the woman in front of him. The 2 men who had come in with Travis were against the wall. They weren't damaged, but they were contained, and the speed and quietness with which that containment had happened was its own message. Travis stood in the center of the basement floor now, in the position Nyla had been standing in. She noted the geometry of it, the reversal, and she did not know if Jae-hyun had arranged it deliberately, but it had the quality of something deliberate. Travis looked at Jae-hyun, then at Nyla, then back at Jae-hyun. She watched him run the calculation. She knew his calculations. She had been subject to their results for 5 years. She could read them in the set of his shoulders, and the movement of his eyes, and the particular way his right hand was or wasn't relaxed at his side. Kane, Jae-hyun said. His voice in the hard-lit basement had the quality of something that takes up all the available frequency. Not loud. Complete. You brought a weapon into my building. I have a permit, Travis said. You have a city permit, Jae-hyun said. You don't have my permit. Those are different documents. Travis's jaw worked. I came for my wife. I'm not your wife, Nyla said. I haven't been your wife since the first time you decided your hands were a valid form of communication. I just didn't have anywhere to go until now. Travis looked at her, and the look contained something she hadn't seen from him often. Something unguarded. Something that in a different man, at a different time, she might have called grief. The specific grief of someone who has lost something they destroyed themselves, and can't fully reconstruct the sequence of their own responsibility in the losing of it. You don't understand what you're walking into, he said. His voice had changed register again, back from the private frequency to something almost conversational, almost reasonable, the voice he used when he was trying to reframe a situation he was losing. This man, what he does, what this building is. You think this is better? You think you're safer here than... I don't need to be safe, she said. I need to be somewhere that doesn't require me to be smaller than I am just to get through the day. Travis stared at her. You spent 5 years telling me the world would destroy me without you, she said. You told me I was too damaged, too alone, too much of a nothing to survive independently. You told me being an orphan meant nobody would ever choose me over their own interests. You told me I was lucky, that I should be grateful. She held his gaze and she felt the words coming from somewhere real, somewhere she hadn't fully accessed before because accessing it had always required a safety she'd never had. I walked out with $73 on a night with a storm and a broken lip, and I survived it. That's not because of him. She didn't gesture toward Jae-hyun, That's because everything you told me about myself was a construction. You built it because a woman who believes she's nothing is a woman who doesn't leave. Travis was silent. I left, she said, and I'm still here. And the only person in this building who has nothing left is you. The words weren't designed to wound. She said them flat and true, the way you state a fact about the weather, because that was what they were. Not her anger at him, not her grief, not her 5 years of accumulated damage delivered as a weapon. Just the truth of the room they were standing in and the distance each of them had traveled to arrive at it. Travis Kane looked at her for a long moment, and then something went out of him. She saw it go. The way a light changes when the power source cuts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but a quality leaving the room that had been present a moment before. The set of his shoulders, the particular density of his stillness, the last of the controlled authority he'd assembled in the basement of this building around the purpose of retrieving what he had decided was his. He looked like a man who had finally arrived at the end of a road he'd been building for years and found nothing at the terminus. Jae-hyun nodded to the man on his left. Travis was escorted out. He didn't struggle. He didn't make a speech. He went with the heavy, emptied movement of someone operating on the far side of the last thing they'd been holding on to. And Nyla watched him go, and she felt not triumph, not relief, not the clean, bright satisfaction she had sometimes imagined in the apartment on Creston Street when she had let herself imagine this moment. She felt the complicated human weight of 5 years resolving into a fact. Not a victory, a conclusion. The kind that leaves you standing in a basement at early morning asking what you do with the next hour. She breathed in through her nose to the count of 4. She breathed out through her mouth to the count of 4. She put the technique away. She didn't think she'd need it the same way again. The basement cleared. People moved with the efficient purposefulness of Jae-hyun's organization returning to its operational rhythms. The contained crises of the morning being processed and filed and addressed with the methodical patience of a structure that has been built to absorb disruption without losing its shape. Jae-hyun walked to where she was standing. He looked at her wrist. At the mark Travis's grip had left, red, not yet bruised, the kind that would be a bruise by afternoon. Medic, he said to no one in particular, and someone materialized from the direction of the stairwell and looked at the wrist with professional detachment and said it wasn't structural and wrapped it with a few practiced movements and left. Nyla looked at the wrapped wrist. You pulled toward him, Jae-hyun said. You saw that. I saw everything, he said, from the moment you came through the stairwell door. A pause. You'd practiced that? Never, she said. I just knew that pulling away was what he expected. She flexed the wrapped wrist carefully. 5 years of being predictable. I figured unpredictability was worth trying. Something moved in his expression. The things she had been learning to read over the past several hours. The small, controlled signals of a man who has spent so long managing what surfaces that even his genuine responses have been trained to come out measured. You did well, he said. Don't do that, she said. He looked at her. Don't manage me with praise, she said. I know what I did. I was there. She met his eyes. Just tell me what happens next. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Travis will be processed by the appropriate people. His arrangement with Vero is documented. The recordings, the transfer records, the intercepts. He'll find that selling lies to a criminal organization produces a kind of accountability that civil courts don't. He paused. He won't be a problem. And Vero, the transfer Yoon made last night, the port contract documentation, the financial architecture. My team has been working since 4 a.m. on a countermeasure. Every account those documents would have compromised has been restructured. Every name that was on that list has been notified and repositioned. He paused. It cost us significantly. 6 months of work. 3 years of careful positioning in the port district. Something in his jaw. We survive it. Yoon, she said. Yoon is... He stopped. The controlled composure did the pressurized thing again, the fracture held by will. Yoon did what he did. The reason he did it doesn't erase what it cost. He looked at the middle distance for a moment. But I understand the arithmetic of it. A man given the choice between loyalty and his child should, choose his child. A long pause. I'll find his son. That was a promise, and I don't make them without intention. She believed him. She didn't know when she had started believing him. Somewhere between the train and the server room, between the elevator code, volunteered freely, and the 30 seconds until what in the server room. But she believed him the way you believe something that has demonstrated its own consistency under the kind of pressure that would have exposed inconsistency if it existed. "What happens to me?" she said. He looked at her. "I'm not asking for a plan," she said. "I'm asking what my options actually are right now. Clear, factual options. The way you described the terrain on the train." He considered this. "Varro's interest in you is resolved. The brothers are in custody. The story Travis told them about the ledger is demonstrably false. And without Travis generating active intelligence, they have no reason to maintain attention on you. You're free to go anywhere in the city without that threat." He paused. "The rest depends on what you want." "I don't know what I want," she said. "I haven't known what I want in 5 years. Travis had a talent for making sure of that." "Then start smaller," he said. "What do you need? Not want, need." She thought about it genuinely. Standing in the bright basement of Dragon Tower with a wrapped wrist and a healing lip and a gray sweater that belonged to a wardrobe she hadn't chosen, she thought about what she actually needed at the granular, immediate level. "Work," she said. "Something real. I don't need to be kept. I need to be useful in a way that accumulates into something." "What can you do?" "I can read people accurately under pressure," she said. "I've been doing it professionally for 5 years, just without the professional part. I know how people construct leverage, and I know how they panic, and I know the specific tells of someone who is lying about what they have access to." "Dis chitao ekus." She paused. "I organized Travis's entire financial life because he was brilliant at acquiring things and terrible at managing them, so I managed everything. Accounts, contacts, calendars, the movement of money between 6 different informal channels." She met his eyes. "I know how shadow economies work from the inside. I just didn't know that's what I knew until this morning." Jae-hyun looked at her for a long moment. "There are women in this city," he said, "who are in the position you were in 3 days ago. Some of them reach out to organizations that try to help and find. The shelter is closed and the funding is gone, and the city has decided that survival infrastructure for women like them is discretionary." Something in his voice, not anger exactly, but the steady low heat of someone who has encountered a wrong consistently enough that it has become a permanent feature of their landscape. "I've been funding 3 safe houses operating outside official channels, quietly. They need someone who understands the population they serve from the inside and can build the operational structure that keeps them functional." "By army bot Scheitmannsam." He paused. "That's not charity work. It's complex, it's occasionally dangerous, and it requires the exact combination of skills you just described." She was quiet. "You don't have to decide now," he said. "I know." She looked at the wrapped wrist, at the door Travis had been walked through, at the stairwell she'd come down alone 30 minutes ago. "I'm not deciding from desperation. I want to be clear about that. I know what decisions made from desperation look like, and I'm not making one." "I know," he said. "I'm also not—" "This isn't gratitude," she said. "I don't owe you anything for last night, and I'm not staying because I feel I do." "I know that too." She looked at him, at the complete, undivided attention that had been present since the train, that she had spent this long learning to understand was not a performance or a strategy, but simply the way this particular man engaged with things he considered worth engaging with. "The women in the safe houses," she said. "How many?" "Currently 41 across the 3 locations," he said. 11 children. She thought about the group home in East Meridian, about being 14 and 17 and the years between, about the specific texture of being in a place that was trying to help you, but didn't fully understand the shape of what you needed because nobody in the building had ever been where you were. About the gap between good intention and functional understanding. She thought about what it would mean to close that gap from the inside. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. No elaboration, no ceremony, the way he did everything, stripped to its functional minimum. They went upstairs. The building, in the hours that followed, did what buildings like Dragon Tower do after a crisis. It processed and reorganized and tightened. the operational machinery of Jae-hyun's empire, conducting its damage assessment and its repositioning with the patient efficiency of something built over 12 years to absorb exactly this kind of disruption. People moved through the corridors with purpose. Phones were answered, decisions made. The 6 months of work that had been lost to Yoon's betrayal being rebuilt from a different foundation with the unsentimental determination of people who understand that surviving a significant loss is itself a form of winning. Nyla spent most of the afternoon on floor 31 with a woman named Sarah, who ran the logistics of the 3 safe houses and who looked at her for the first 10 minutes with the flat professional skepticism of someone who has been let down by well-intentioned newcomers before, and who, by the end of the second hour, was showing her the operational structure of all 3 locations with the directness of someone who has found a person who understands what they're looking at. She was exhausted by evening, bone-tired in a way that went past the physical. The accumulated weight of everything that had happened between the subway platform at Caldwell Avenue and this particular chair on this particular floor, the long bill of the last 48 hours presenting itself for payment now that the immediate pressure had released. She was sitting at the window of the room she'd been given when she heard the knock. "It's open," she said. Jae-hyun came in. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him, slightly less than fully composed. Not damaged, not exhausted, but carrying the specific weight of a day that had taken things from him. The suit jacket was off, the sleeves pushed up, the dragon tattoo visible the full length of his forearm in the evening light. He sat in the chair on the other side of the window, not close, not far, the distance of 2 people who have been through something together and are sitting in the aftermath of it. They looked at the city for a while without talking. The rain had stopped. Meridian City in the early evening light was a different organism from the one she had walked through 2 nights ago. The same streets, the same geometry, but viewed now from a height and with eyes that had been recalibrated by everything that had happened in the hours between. She could see the financial district, the port in the far south, the residential grid spreading east and west, the particular density of the neighborhood she had never been able to afford, and the spread of the ones where the apartments on Creston Street were not unusual. "How is it?" he said. Meaning the day, the work, Sarah. "Real," she said. "It's real work. There's too much of it, and the infrastructure is being held together by people who care more than they're resourced for, which is the only way that kind of work ever gets done." She paused. "I understand it. From the inside." "I know you do." She looked at the city. "Yoon's son," she said. "We have a location," he said. "An extraction team is moving tonight." He was quiet for a moment. "He's alive. That was confirmed 2 hours ago." She absorbed this. Thought about Yoon in the basement of the building, the drive in his white-knuckled hand, the apology that had come too late to function as anything useful, and that had been genuine anyway. The specific tragedy of a man dismantling the thing he loved most in order to protect the thing he loved first. "What happens to Yoon after?" she said. Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment that contained a complex internal conversation she wasn't fully party to. "He lives with what he did," he said finally. In my experience, that's the longest sentence there is." A pause. "He won't work for me again. But I won't leave his son in a room somewhere because of what his father did to save him." She looked at his profile in the evening light, at the scar along his jaw, faint, the old kind, at the tattoo and the rolled sleeves and the complete tiredness of someone who has spent 12 years building something and watched a significant portion of it come apart in a single morning and has spent the afternoon beginning to rebuild. "Why the dragon?" she said. He looked at her. "The tattoo. Most people who have them have a reason." He looked at his forearm for a moment. "My father told me when I was young that a dragon is the only creature in old stories that doesn't need anyone's permission to exist," he said. "That it's not good or evil by nature, it's powerful, and what it does with that is its own decision." He paused. "I was 17, and it seemed like important information to carry on my body. Did it turn out to be true?" He thought about this honestly, which she appreciated. "Partially," he said. "The part about not needing permission? Yes. The part about decisions being entirely your own? Less so. Everything you decide has weight that lands on other people." He looked at the city. Yoon's decision landed on 40 people who work for me and didn't know they were working on compromised ground. My decision to get on a train 2 nights ago landed on you. I got on the train myself, she said. You did, he said, but Yoon told me to sit beside you. And you would have anyway, she said. You would have looked at a woman with a split lip and a flinch response, and you would have sat beside her regardless. He didn't answer, which was an answer. The city below them moved through its evening rhythms, indifferent and complex and continuous, the way cities move, carrying millions of individual moments simultaneously, none of them aware of the others, all of them constituting the same organism. Somewhere in it, Travis Kane was in a room being made aware of the specific consequences of 6 weeks of escalating bad decisions. Somewhere in it, a young man named Yoon's son was being extracted from a location by people who moved in the dark with careful professionalism. Somewhere in it, 41 women and 11 children were in safe houses that were underfunded and overfull and held together by people who understood the difference between good intentions and functional understanding. And in a room on floor 30 of Dragon Tower, 2 people who had met on a subway train in a storm were sitting at a window watching a city that had tried to swallow both of them and had failed, and the silence between them had the quality of something that has been earned rather than assumed. Not comfortable exactly, not easy, but honest. The silence of 2 people who have seen each other in difficult light and haven't looked away. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask. On the train, when you looked at me. When you first looked at me. She turned her head to look at him directly. What did you see? He held her gaze. Someone who had decided they had nothing left to lose, he said. The way I told you. And now? He looked at her for a long moment, with that complete attention, and what she saw in his eyes was not romance, not possession, not the look she had learned over 5 years to read as the precursor to something that would cost her. It was something plainer and more durable than any of those things. The look of someone seeing a person clearly and finding the person worth seeing. Someone who has decided, he said, that she has everything left to find. She looked at that for a moment, turned it over, found it true. She looked back at the city. Below them, Meridian City stretched to the horizon in every direction. The lights beginning to come on as the evening deepened, the streets and the bridges and the dark water of the harbor in the south, the whole vast, complicated machinery of a city that had not been kind to her and had not destroyed her either, that had simply been what cities are, indifferent, enormous, full of the accidental and the deliberate in equal measure. She had walked into it 2 nights ago with a broken lip and $73. She was still here, not saved, not rescued, not transformed into something that required the word become to describe. Just still here, with the same hands and the same history and the same pamphlet breathing and the accumulated knowledge of everything she had survived and organized and managed and understood from the inside, all of it still hers, all of it real, none of it wasted even when it had been acquired at the worst possible cost. She had left the $3 in the envelope. She understood now what that had been. Not reluctance to take everything, not the residual politeness of someone trained to leave space for the person she was escaping. It had been, without her knowing it at the time, a final act of acknowledgement, not of Travis, but of the woman who had lived in that apartment for 5 years and had learned things there that she was going to carry forward. The survival knowledge, the reading of rooms and faces, and the architecture of other people's intentions, the ability to be still in dangerous spaces, the understanding of what leverage looks like from the inside. $3 for 5 years of the hardest possible education. It was, she thought now, a reasonable trade. The city lights kept coming on, one by one and then in groups, the way they always did as evening deepened into night. The endless, ordinary miracle of a city illuminating itself against the dark without being asked to, without needing to be told, just because that is what cities do and have always done, and will keep doing long after every specific person inside them is gone. Nyla Mercer sat in a chair by the window of a room in a building that was not hers, and looked at all of it and breathed, in through her nose and out through her mouth. And this time she didn't count. She didn't need to count anymore. Outside, the last of the storm clouds finally moved east, and the sky above Meridian City opened into the clear, cold dark of a night that had decided, at last, to be simple. Below them, the city continued. Above them, the stars came out. And that was enough. That was, for the first time in a very long time, more than enough. Fade out.